data warehouses are essentially they're purpose-built systems. There's typically one purpose-built system in every corporation, a single source of truth, if you will, that's built for reporting and forecasting business activity and informing business decisions. It's a decision support system. That's a much older term that you may hear from time to time. People refer to data warehouses as. The term, I think, kind of became popular sometime in the 90s. It's been around for a while now. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But I think the key thing to understand about data warehouses, they are purpose-built for a very specific thing, which is that reporting and forecasting of business activity. And so they're not a generic concept. They're not something that just any database can do. And let's talk a little bit about why. Some typical things that you're going to find on that. The first is that it is a large centralized store of data. Like I mentioned before, typically companies are going to have one of these. It doesn't always pan out that way. Larger companies, especially ones that have grown by acquisition, they have more of that. But those systems are going to be typically accumulated from a large number of other data sources, both inside and outside the company. A lot of times data from outside the company will be brought in and augmented. It could be, I don't know, things like if you're in the utility space and you're looking at energy consumption, you might load weather data from an outside source and even weather forecast data so that you can predict the future. You can predict how energy consumption is going to go, maybe do things like switch power on a transmission grid. Those are some of the kinds of things that data warehouses would be used for and how external data would be brought into those. The other thing, though, with the data warehouse is that really sets it apart, I would say, from your typical operational system where you run your business, an ERP system or a CRM system, something like that. The data warehouses are very, very heavy on the concept of historical information. And so whereas those systems, those operational systems are going to get, purged, the old orders and old invoices and sales transactions and whatnot are going to be purged out of those systems, once they've shipped and they've, recognized the revenue. A data warehouse is probably going to maintain the history of that for some time. Again, used for reporting and for forecasting purposes. It's used to kind of let the past predict what the future might look like. This is probably the key thing about our data warehouse, I would say. And I'll talk about this here a little bit more on the next slide. Data warehouses are optimized for analytical queries. They're not very good with transactional queries at all. In fact, you're going to see here in a moment as I talk about it, there's actually a trade-off between how fast a database system can run a transactional or a transaction type activity, something like a customer service person entering data into a screen. The better a system is at handling those types of things, generally the worse it is at handling analytics. And the reverse is true as well. Generally speaking, a system that's set up for analytics is not going to be so great at handling transactions. So the data warehouses are very purpose-built. They're very optimized for analytics and analytical queries. Some things that it's not. I think this is important to note here because there are probably some misconceptions out there. The first is that data warehouses are not a legacy or obsolete concept. It's not hardware. There are software data warehouses. In fact, it's not even any specific vendor. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it's definitely not hardware alone. There are vendors out there that specialize in data warehousing that have only a cloud presence, companies like Snowflake. So it's not on-prem only. Again, exists in the cloud, can sit on just about any database out there. It's not vendor specific. You can use MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB even can be used for data warehouses, not necessarily optimized for analytical queries, but it can certainly be used in that way. And I think the main thing I want you to understand is just the data warehouses. It's not some group of vendors. It's not some group of products. It is a concept. It is a database that's built, again, for that specific purpose of reporting and forecasting business activity.